AEW or WWE? Which company presents stars best? Who treats talent better? Let's talk about that in today's Wrestling Ramble. So I had this idea to talk about which stars are presented better, those going from WWE to AEW or vice versa. Now, you're probably thinking what I was thinking when I came up with this. This is going to be a little lopsided for obvious reasons. There's not hardly anyone I can think of outside of Cody Rhodes that has gone from AEW to WWE. Now, like I said, obviously, you're going to have more former WWE guys in AEW. And what I wanted to talk about in presenting this list and going over their careers and their presentations and also how they're treated in the company, but more importantly, I want to compare how they were shown on programming in WWE to AEW, from AEW to WWE. And as stated, this is going to be a lopsided list. We've got more WWE stars going to AEW, so let's go ahead and start with the one notable name that went from AEW to WWE, and that is Cody Rhodes. Now, if you're going to contrast Cody Rhodes' previous run in WWE to his run in AEW, that might be a little more simple, where you can say, okay, Cody Rhodes probably got paid more in AEW, was presented better to a decent degree, and was treated better as well. He was seen as a main event player to start out. Of course, he couldn't challenge for the world title, and then had that feud with MJF. In AEW, a lot of people call it the Codyverse. He would not interact with the Elite or a lot of the other guys that are on the program, and would pick and choose who he wants to work with to have his vision of professional wrestling, which is very different from those like Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. If we're talking about, like I said, the previous run Cody had in WWE compared to his run in AEW, I'd say the AEW run was better. Now, hindsight's 2020, he's back in WWE and he's a bigger star than ever. And it's not just because WWE is a bigger, more mainstream platform, but because they brought him in to treat him like a main eventer. That feud with Roman Reigns, which will hopefully at some point culminate in him finishing the story, getting the world title, everything about it was great. And it's been so awesome to see this transformation of Cody Rhodes going from character to character, trying to find himself as a young man in WWE, to getting into his groove in AEW, having the crowd turn against him, and then come to WWE, and he's one of, if not the most popular stars in the company today. It's just such an awesome story. And I know it didn't culminate the way we probably wanted it to at WrestleMania against Roman Reigns. Still, his run in WWE now is infinitely better than anything he has done. So in this regard, I would say WWE now is treating Cody Rhodes better and presenting him so much better than AEW ever did, and even better than WWE did previously. Now we're going to go on to the stars that went from WWE to AEW and compare and contrast their runs between those companies and how they were presented and how they're treated. And there's a lot of them, so I'm not going to be able to get to everybody. I'm going to try to cover some key ones. Let's start with Jon Moxley from WWE stars that went to AEW. In terms of exposure, it's not fair. WWE is going to win in that department in a lot of regards. Now, if we're talking about who was treated better in WWE, Dean Ambrose or Jon Moxley, I say this if they're two separate people. Ambrose did not get to do what he wanted. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the Brock Lesnar match that he had at WrestleMania, and him recalling however long it was later, I think after he left WWE, he went on Jericho's podcast and was saying that Brock didn't want to do anything. I had all these ideas, he didn't want to do it, and as you'll recall, it basically turned into a match with a ton of chairs in the ring. When it comes to creative freedom and allowing Moxley to be unleashed, to have the matches he wants to have, to say what he wants to say, to do what he wants to do, AEW is definitely the winner. When it comes to presentation, that's where you can take two paths for this conversation. One would be Jon Moxley is more seen as a main event star than Dean Ambrose was. Granted, WWE has a plethora of talent, not so much main event talent, but they have a lot of stars to choose from. Still, Moxley was able to win the WWE title. He was a part of the Shield. That was his big breakout moment. Got to have a good singles run. The other path would be that you could take in this conversation. It's just a matter of preference, I suppose. Do you prefer Dean Ambrose or do you prefer Jon Moxley? Moxley. We're all biased, and I will say, for me, I had never seen Jon Moxley until his run outside of WWE, till after WWE. I was introduced to him when he was Dean Ambrose. Personally, I do prefer Dean Ambrose. If you ask Moxley, he hates Dean Ambrose, wants nothing to do with it, wants to stray as far away from that as possible. I remember him recalling another story from WWE where he came out, I think Seth Rollins was in the ring, this is during their feud, and J&J Security came up to him and he had a hot dog cart and he squirts a mustard bottle at J&J Security, something like that. And Vince was pitching this to Ambrose. Vince McMahon was pitching this to him, and Ambrose is like, oh, so I'm an idiot. And Vince is like, no, this is you. This is so you, Dean. This is Dean. And guys, I love Dean Ambrose. Of course, like I said, I'm biased. That's who I was introduced to first. So for me, I think Dean Ambrose was the better character, and it actually was a character. On top of that, Moxley is just Moxley. It's just him, as Triple H said, turned up to 11. The best characters are those turned up to 11. And it's usually the case. I feel like in this case is an exception, where Moxley being himself is not a good character. But in terms of the creative freedom he is allowed in AEW, if you were to ask Jon Moxley, he would say, absolutely, I am presented better in AEW. If you were to ask me, I say WWE presented him so much better than AEW. Granted, they did not have him as a constant fixture in the main event. Moving on, let's talk about Christian Cage. He was a victim of Randy Orton's resurgence of the Legend Killer gimmick, where he'd go around and beat up the vets, and it was a running meme. If Randy Orton punts you or whatever, then you're going to AEW. He punts Christian Cage, he's in AEW. He punts Paul White, he's in AEW. He punts Mark Henry, he's in AEW. When it comes to notoriety, you can't beat WWE. That's the one thing that's unfair to compare, so I won't do that. If we're looking at presentation, consistently, I think Christian Cage is presented better in AEW. And the heat that he has right now is, I'd say, second to none to anyone in the company. Let me know if there is somebody else that has more heat right now than Christian Cage. Because even someone like an MJF, who people consider the best heel in the business, MJF will get cheered a lot of the time. It'll be kind of split, not necessarily 50-50. One part of the crowd is cheering for him, the other section's booing him. But there'll be times where he says something and the fans resonate with that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. You actually have a legitimate grievance here. With Christian Cage, they don't like anything he says, and that's a good thing. They are booing the absolute hell out of him. There was a clip where a fan recorded one of his promos on Dynamite. I believe this was the Dynamite for the 10th, and he is just getting booed out of the building. He can barely get a word out because they're booing so loud. I think in terms of pure heel heat, that kind of heat where you put the microphone in their face and you can barely hear them talking with a live microphone, it's Christian Cage in AEW and Dominic Mysterio in WWE. They're both on that level. I don't know if it's exactly the same. I haven't compared the sound of boos between them, but just off of memory, I'd say those two have the purest form of heel heat in the business. Now, this is also not too fair of a comparison, not only because WWE is more mainstream than AEW, but because Christian Cage is at a different point in his career, where he's winding down, not wrestling as much, and he was a lot younger, a tag team wrestler, then became singles, went to TNA, was a main eventer there, came back, eventually won the World Heavyweight title, had the one more match feud with Randy Orton. I think here in AEW, he is presented better. Now, could that be because he's just simply allowed to take the reins? I think that's the case for a lot of these people, is if you have a good mind for the business, you're an experienced vet, you know what you have to do to get over, then AEW could be the perfect platform for you. But it's a double-edged sword, because just as you can have somebody that has great ideas, knows how to present themselves, knows how to get over, knows what they're doing out there for their career trajectory, you have those people that maybe had some bad tendencies, maybe had poor judgment, didn't have the greatest ideas, and they're now exposing them on AEW. Tony Khan is not nipping those in the bud as a Vince McMahon would in WWE. So I think that's the one discrepancy that has to be taken into account, is that AEW is a better platform overall for creative freedom, and that can be good or bad depending on the wrestler. It's not going to be universally better for everyone that goes over there from WWE. If you learn how to present yourself in WWE and you're being held back in certain regards because they're not taking all your ideas and all your ideas are good, AEW is the perfect platform for you. But if WWE is preventing you from doing things because they know it will expose you, AEW could be your worst enemy. That environment could be bad for you. So I think overall, Christian Cage is presented more consistently here. And I think, like I said, I think it falls into the category of Christian Cage knows what he's doing, and WWE didn't want to invest that amount of time into him. And it's a different stage of his career where WWE, they're trying to write him off, not use him anymore because they have so much talent, and AEW could use the star power of Cage to elevate others, such as a Jungle Boy or whomever Christian wants to work with. So overall, I think the presentation of Christian Cage and AEW compared to Christian and WWE doesn't far exceed it, because there's a lot of things you can go off of in Christian's WWE career. He reached incredible heights there as a tag team wrestler and was able to eventually win the World Heavyweight Championship, and that's still his greatest accomplishment. But in terms of, like I said, the consistency and how much heat he has generated in AEW, it's second to none in the pro wrestling business today, with the exception of maybe Dominic Mysterio. They're both vying for that pure heel heat title. So we've gone over Cody Rhodes, Jon Moxley, and Christian Cage. I think for Rhodes and Cage, they're better off where they are than where they were. For Moxley, I think he is that wrestler I was speaking of, where he has some bad tendencies and that's being exposed. But what do you guys think? Which stars overall are presented better between AEW and WWE? Of course, we only covered 3, and there's a lot more to go over on the AEW side, so we'll continue this for the next video. That's all I've got. I'll see y'all later.